Hello and welcome back to another full step-by-step PC build guide, and today I'm going to show you how to build a PC in the NZXT H5 Flow. So taking a look at the other parts I'm going to be building with today. For the motherboard I'm going to be using the BIOSTAR B760A Silver. For the CPU I'm going to be using Intel's 13th Gen i7, the 13700K. Keeping our CPU cool, I've got a 240mm IO from ASUS, it's the ROG RYUO 3. For RAM I've got 32GB of Kingston Fury Beast RGB, DDR5 at 5600 megatransfers per second. For storage I'm going with two Gen 4 NVMe M.2 drives for this build. The first is from Kingston and it's their Fury Renegade in 500GB capacity, while the second is from Team Group and it's their T-Force Cardia A440 Pro in 1TB capacity. Powering the whole build I'm going to be using Montec's latest ATX 3.0 power supply, it's the 1200 watt Titan Gold. For the graphics card I'm going to be using the ASUS Tough Gaming RTX 4070 Ti. And the final part for today's build is the new second generation of Lian Li's AL120 Uni fans in black. Okay, that's all the parts, let's get building. So as usual, I'm going to make a start by preparing our case, and as we go I'll tell you about all the case's main features. So our tempered glass side panel is held on with a captive thumb screw at the back. Once we've loosened the thumb screw at the back, we can pull the panel out from the top and lift away. Our other side panel is held on with two captive thumb screws at the back, which once we loosen, we can pull the panel backwards and lift away. Taking a look at our case's front I/O, we've got a power button, a single USB Type A and a single USB Type C port, and a combined head for a microphone jack. On the top of the case we've got a magnetically attached dust filter which we can simply lift up and pull away. To remove our case's front panel we simply need to pop it out from the top and then it can be lifted up and away. If we take a look at the back of the front panel we've just removed, you'll notice we have a nylon dust filter on the back. There's a little clip at the bottom which we need to pull out, and then we can pull the dust filter down to remove it for cleaning. At the front of the case you're going to be able to mount up to two 140 or two 120mm fans, or up to 240 or 280mm radiator, and you can see the front fan stroke radiator mounting location is recessed back from the front of the case. To help with installing fans and radiators at the front, we've got a removable bracket. It's held on with two captive thumb screws which we need to loosen, and once the thumb screws have been loosened the bracket can be tilted back into the case, pulled forward and lifted away. At the top of the case it's up to two 120 or two 140mm fans, or up to a 240mm radiator. While at the back of the case it's up to 120mm fan or radiator, and NZXT have pre-installed a 120mm fan. It's a plain black fan without any ARGB on it, and importantly it has got a 3-pin fan connector, so you're not going to be able to run it in PWM mode, you're going to have to run it in DC mode. Now I am planning on installing Lian Li's Uni fans in the case, so I'm going to go ahead and remove this fan. Our final fan mounting location is down at the bottom, and again NZXT have installed a 120mm non-PWM fan. We've then got this intake here which is going to direct all the air coming from the fan up towards your GPU. To remove this there's two screws we're going to need to loosen at the back. With our two screws at the back removed we can simply pull upwards at the front, and then we're going to be able to lift the bracket up, and you'll notice I've already freed up the fan cable and again remove it from the case. So this is the bracket we've just removed, so you can see our fan on it, and then we've got this intake which is designed to direct air up to the GPU. And our fan is just attached to the bracket with some long radiator screws. So again I'm going to be using all Lian Li Uni fans, so I'm going to remove this fan from the bracket. And then with all four of the screws removed, we can simply lift our fan off the bracket. In terms of motherboard support, it's up to ATX, and if you want to go with a CPU air cooler, you'll be pleased to hear you can fit a pretty large cooler up to a maximum height of 165mm. At the rear of the case we've got 7 horizontal PCIe expansion slots, and graphics cards up to a maximum length of 365mm are supported. You'll notice we've got this nice cable management bar here. If you want, it is removable. We've just got 4 screws at the back to remove. And then with the 4 screws removed, you can simply tilt the bracket down from the top and lift it out from the case. So as you can see, this doesn't look very good with the bracket removed. I don't have any particular reason to remove it, I've only showed you how to do it for completeness, so I'm going to go ahead and put the bracket back. On the bottom of the case we've got 2 tray-style dust filters. This one here is for our power supply's intake, and it's just simply pulling it out from the back. While this one here covers the intake for our bottom mounted fan, and it's simply a matter of pulling it out to the front for cleaning. So moving into the case's rear compartment, you see we've got our case accessory box here, so I'll go ahead and remove it. So this is everything that comes in the case accessory box. So we've got all our screws individually packaged and labelled. It's good to see we've got the standoff insertion and removal tool as well as one spare standoff, and we've got plenty of cable ties. So taking a look at the case, the cutouts all look really good. We have a lovely long cutout at the top, we have a nice cutout here, and the cutouts into the front of the case actually come in from the bottom, which is going to be great because you're going to be able to bring your GPU cables straight in from the power supply compartment. We don't have any rubber grommets, but I think you can get away with this because we've got this nice cable cover here. And again, the motherboard is going to be quite far at the top, and when we put our radiator at the top, you're not actually going to see these. In terms of cable management, this also looks really good. Cable routing space is up to 23mm. We've got lots of Velcro cable straps. We've got these cable management clips to help hold your cables out of the way. And as well, we've got plenty of cable tie-down points as well. The case doesn't have a hard drive cage, and this removable bracket is our only place to mount drives. So on this side, you're going to be able to fit a 2.5-inch drive, and over on this side, it's either a 2.5-inch or a 3.5-inch drive. The bracket is held on with a captive thumb screw, so we can go ahead and loosen it up, and then it can simply be tilted out and lifted away. Our power supply is going to go down at the bottom, and the case is compatible with full-sized ATX power supplies. In the specifications, I couldn't see a maximum length of power supply supported, but the distance from the back of the case to the front of this bracket is 250mm. So taking a look at the back of the case, you'll notice we don't have any removable power supply brackets, so we are going to set our power supply in from the side before screwing it in from the back. We're now ready to start working on the motherboard, and we're going to be installing our CPU, the backplate for our CPU cooler, our M.2 SSDs, and our RAM before we put the motherboard into the case. To open the socket cover, we need to push this lever down and out and then bring it all the way to the top, and then we can lift the socket cover up. We can then set our CPU down into the socket, lining it up with the notches at the top and the bottom. Once we're happy the CPU is sitting correctly in the socket, we can close the lever down, and if we apply a little bit of pressure here, the plastic cover will pop off. We can then close the lever down again to secure the CPU in the socket. Next, we've got our M.2 SSD to install, so we need to remove the heatsink. So the heatsink removed, you'll notice we've actually got two M.2 SSD sockets. This one is for a drive. This shorter one here is for a Wi-Fi and Bluetooth module, which I'm not going to be adding into this build. So we've got our M.2 screw here. I'm just going to loosen it. So we can then set our drive into the socket at a slight angle, wiggling it into place. And then we go ahead and flatten the drive down, and then we're going to be able to secure it into place with the screw we've just removed. Before we return the heatsink, we have some plastic protection on the back we need to remove. And then we can line the heatsink back up again. So on the motherboard, we've actually got another two M.2 SSD slots that we can install a drive into. And one of the nice things BIOSTAR are doing is they're actually installing the M.2 screws in the socket, which is absolutely brilliant because normally you have to go searching in the motherboard box to try and find them. So I'm going to install it in the bottom slots. I'm just going to remove this screw. So you'll notice these two bottom slots don't actually have a heatsink on them, but that isn't a problem because our second drive actually comes with a really beefy heatsink. So I'm just going to set it into the socket and wiggle it into place. Next, we're going to install our RAM. We've got two sticks here. We're going to install it in the second and fourth slot along from the CPU. So I'm going to open the clips on these slots. Then we can line the RAM up with a slot. And once we're happy everything's lined up, it's just some firm pressure to the RAM and it's going to clip into place. And then it's exactly the same process with our second stick. Line it up in the slot and some firm pressure and it'll clip into place. Next thing for us to do is install the backplate for our CPU cooler. Because we've got an LGA 1700 socket, it's important we make sure these clips are all pulled to the outer setting, and then it should just be a simple matter of lining things up with the back of the motherboard. There we go. And then we've got one of these standoff screws to go onto each corner. Just before we get the motherboard into the case, we're going to need to install our motherboard's I/O shield. So taking care that we've got it up the right way, we're just going to line it up with the cutout at the back. And then taking care that we don't cut ourselves, it's just some firm pressure to get it to clip into place. Also, just before we get the motherboard in, I want to point out that the middle standoff is different. All the other standoffs have a hole in it for a screw. The middle standoff is solid, and actually there's a little solid bit in the middle that protrudes. And the idea behind it is it's going to go through the hole in the middle of the motherboard and hold your motherboard in place, helping you get the other screws into it, and you're not actually going to put a screw into this middle standoff. Then we can set the motherboard into the case, line that up with the I/O shield at the back. And you'll notice that once we get the middle standoff into place, it's going to help hold the motherboard in place. And then we can secure the motherboard into place with 8 screws labelled B from the case accessory box. Okay, next thing to do is get our case cables plugged in. So the header down the bottom left of the motherboard is for a HD audio cable. So we'll bring it through the cutout. We're going to line it up with the header with the HD audio text facing up the way and push into place, and then pull the excess cable through to the back. Our front panel connectors are going to go into this header here, and NZXT have been really kind and combined them all into one cable for us. Some other cases you get them in all individual cables to plug into the various pins in the motherboard. So all we're going to need to do is plug it in with the front panel text facing up the way, and then we can pull the excess cable through to the back. Our front panel type C cable is going to go into this header here, so we'll bring it through the cutout, line it up with the header and push into place, and then again pull the excess cable through to the back. Just above that we've got a USB 3.0 header, so we'll bring the cable through, line it up and push into place, and again pull the excess cable through to the back. Next thing to do is install our power supply, and this is a fully modular power supply, meaning it comes without any of the cables plugged in. I've gone ahead and plugged in the cables we're going to need. So I plugged in our 24-pin cable. We've got 2 EPS cables because our motherboard has an 8-pin and also a 4-pin cable. And I plugged in our 12-volt high power cable for our graphics card. I've also plugged in a SATA power cable. Although we're not installing any SATA drives, our Lian Li Unifan hub is going to need SATA power. Another important thing to mention, this is our power supply's intake fan, so we're going to need to install it facing down the way. So it's just a matter of lifting our case cables up and out of the way, sliding our power supply into the case, and then all the way to the back. And then we can secure the power supply into place with 4 of the larger screws from the case accessory bag. One last thing to point out about our power supply, it has a 0 fan mode, so whenever the power supply is under low load, the fan will stop spinning, helping reduce noise in our build. So all we need to do is turn this switch to on to enable it, and that seems like a good idea to me. The next thing to do is get our power cables plugged in, and at the top left of the motherboard, we've got an 8 and 4-pin EPS header. So I'm going to go ahead and bring our cables through the cutout, line them up with the header, and push into place. And for our 4-pin header, you'll notice that our 8-pin cable splits into 2, so we just need to plug one of these in. So we can go ahead and bring the other 4-pin connector and the rest of the cable through to the back of the case. And our 24-pin power cable is going to go into here, so again, bringing it through the cutout, lining things up with the header, and pushing into place. And then we'll pull the excess cable through to the back. Okay, next thing to do is get our case fans installed, and we'll start at the front where we're going to have 2 120mm Lian Li Unifans. So to join them together, all we need to do is push them here and then slide them down into place. Now, one of the nice things about these new AL120 Unifans is the additional connectors here actually now come off. So all we need to do is turn them, and the same here, and we're going to be able to remove them. So that's not only going to look cleaner, but it's also, if you're going to, for example, install them on a radiator, it should give you improved compatibility. So another improvement with the second version of the Lian Li Unifans is there's now only one cable to connect them up to the hub. So all we need to do is line this cable up with the connector at the top. And once we've got it lined up, we just need to push it into place. And again, you'll see that it's nice and slim now at the top, whereas the previous fans had a big plastic connector, which again made the fans much longer than they needed to be and affected the compatibility in some uses. So we're going to have the fans at the front of the case set to intake, so I've turned them upside down, and then we can set our fan bracket into place on the back. And then we're going to secure the fan bracket to the fans using 8 fan screws from the case accessory bag. Then if we take a look at the side of the bracket, you'll notice we've got a cutout for the fan cable, so I'm just going to pass the fan cable through the cutout. Then I'm just going to pass the cable coming from the fans through the cutout to the back of the case and line the fan bracket back up into place. And then we can go ahead and secure the fan bracket with the 2 thumb screws. And then we can pass the cable from another Lian Li Unifan through to the back of the case and line the fan up at the rear of the case. And then we can secure the fan into place at the back with the 4 fan screws we removed earlier on. Then we can set our Lian Li Unifan onto the bottom fan bracket, and then we'll secure it back into place with the long radiator screws. Then we can set the fan bracket back into place at the bottom, and then we can secure the bracket back into place with the 2 screws we had removed earlier on. Next thing to do is get all our Lian Li fans plugged into our hub. So if you look at our hub, we've got 4 channels on it, 1, 2, 3 and 4. So all it is a matter of taking the fan. So I'm going to take our rear fan and plug it into channel number 1. We've got our bottom fan into channel number 2, and then our front fans into number 3. And that leaves us 1 spare port on the hub. And this is where I'm going to plug the fans on the radiator into, because I'm going to use actually Lian Li Unifans on the radiator as well, rather than the fans that came with our AIO. So taking a look at the other cables coming from the bottom of the hub, we've got 2 SATA power cables, so we need to plug these into the SATA cable coming from our power supply. Okay, so there's 1 and 2. So there's 2 additional cables we need to plug into the bottom of our hub. The first is a USB cable, so we'll go ahead and line the cable up and push into place, and the other we've got a USB 2.0 header to plug into the bottom of our motherboard. And then we've got our last cable, which just pushes into place here. And then coming from it, it's a double cable. So we've got a 4-pin fan PWM connector, and we've got a 3-pin 5V ARGB connector. And the idea behind this cable is if you plug it into your motherboard, there's an option in the Lian Li L Connect to allow motherboard sync. So you can actually control the fans with your motherboard fan curves and control the ARGB with your motherboard's ARGB software package. Alternatively, because we have plugged a USB cable into the motherboard, we can use Lian Li's L Connect to control not only the fan speed, but also the ARGB effects on the fan, and you've got a bigger range of options using Lian Li's L Connect. So that's the option I would go for. So next to our front panel connectors, we've got 2 USB 2.0 headers. So I'm going to bring the USB cable coming from our hub through and plug it in to one of the headers. And then we're just going to pull the excess cable through to the back. So because I'm going to be plugging also the fans in our AIO into the Lian Li Unifan hub, I'm going to plug the PWM connector into our CPU fan header, which is this header here. So we'll go ahead and bring the cable through, line it up and push into place. So all of our motherboard RGB headers are here at the top right of the case. The top one is a 12V 4-pin connector, and the bottom 2 are 3-pin 5V ARGB connectors, and they're the ones we're after. So we'll go ahead and bring the cable through, line up with the header and push into place. So next we can set our Lian Li Unifans onto the radiator. So the radiator screws that come with the AIO actually won't work for securing the Lian Li Unifans. The problem is our Lian Li Unifans are slightly thicker than the fans that come with the AIO, and when you actually set it through, it doesn't reach the radiator. The only way it would reach the radiator is if the head of the screw fitted into this recessed area in the rubber pad, and there's quite a big head on this screw. So I'm going to use some separate screws where the head will actually fit into the hole, allowing us to secure it to the radiator, and I'll put the link to these screws in the description. If you just want to install it with the standard fans that came with the AIO, and that's what most people are going to want to do, I've made a separate guide on it. So I'll put a link to that video in the description. I've just got these new fans, so I'm really keen to test them out. Then we can go ahead and set the AIO into place at the top, and then we'll get the AIO secured into place at the top with the short radiator screws. And then we can replace the top dust filter. We can pass the fan cable coming from our Lian Li Unifans through to the back, where we can get it plugged into port number 4 on our Unifan hub. Next we can add some thermal paste to the centre of the CPU. If you're using the AIO from new, it will have it pre-applied to the cold plate, so you don't need to add more. I've used it before, which is why I'm doing this. So just before we line our AIO up, there's 2 important things to point out. The first is we're going to want the tubes down at the bottom, because it has a logo on it and it needs to be this way to display it correctly. And the other thing you'll notice, I'm just going to wrap the cables coming from the bottom of the AIO up round to the top. So when we secure it into place with the thumb screws, the cables are going to be nice and tidy at the side of the AIO. I'm going to take care that I don't get the cables onto the cold plate. So what I'm going to do is just line it up with the bracket beneath, and then all we need to do is get a thumb screw onto each corner. So that's all 4 thumb screws on. I've made sure our cables aren't anywhere near the cold plate, and I'm just going to tighten them up in turn. So the USB cable coming from our pump, I'm just going to pass through to the back of the case. And then we've got our second USB 2.0 header at the bottom, so we can bring the cable coming from the pump through, line it up with the header, and push into place, and then just pull the excess cable through to the back. Whereas the 4-pin PWM cable I'm going to plug into our pump header, which is just at the top right of the motherboard. So plugging that cable in was not easy. I think if I was doing things again, what I would do is install the pump before putting the radiator up at the top, get all the cables plugged in, and then install the radiator at the top. We're now ready to install our graphics card, and we're going to need to remove the second and third expansion slot cover from the top. So this means loosening these two screws to allow us to slide the protective cover backwards. So with the screws loosened, we're able to slide this cover backwards, and that's then going to let us get access to the screws we need to remove the slot covers. Then we can open the clip in the top PCIe slot. Next we can set our graphics card into the case, lining it up with the slot. Once we're happy everything's lined up, it's just some firm pressure to the graphics card and it is going to clip into place. And then we can secure the graphics card into place with the two screws we removed earlier on. And then we can slide the cover back into place and tighten up the two screws. We can then bring our 12-volt high power cable through the cutout at the bottom, line it up with the graphics card and push into place, making sure we get a nice solid click, which we have, and then we can bring the excess cable through to the back. Okay, last thing to do is some cable management. So that's the build complete, and as you can see I've gone ahead and set everything up off camera. The reason I've done that is I've covered setting up all the components before. So I've done a build guide with another BIOSTAR motherboard, and the process for setting this one up and that one up is exactly the same. All you're going to need to do is head over to BIOSTAR's website and download the drivers and install them. In terms of setting up the IO, I've already made a full step-by-step guide covering it. And as well, the brand new Lian Li AL120 Unifans version 2, I've made a separate video on how to set them up in L-Connect. So again, I'll put links to all those videos in the description. And following this guide up to this point and then looking at those other videos, you should be able to get your PC up and running and looking this good. So what I want to do now is take a look at the temperatures. So our i7-13700K idled at 38 degrees and reached a maximum of 102 degrees during a 10-minute ID64 stability test. During that test, there was up to 22% thermal throttling. The RTX 4070 Ti idled at 29 degrees and reached a maximum of 67 degrees during the stability test. In terms of noise levels, the average noise at idle was only 34 decibels, while under load it was 52 decibels. So those temperatures, particularly the CPU temperature, might sound really high, but it is important to remember we've got a really hard to cool CPU, being cooled with a 240mm IO rather than a 360 or 280, and importantly it's set to exhaust where it's not going to cool as well as an intake. What is important is when you're actually using the PC for gaming, the temperatures were significantly lower. And most of the time the CPU temperatures were in the 60s, while the GPU temperatures were in the 50s. So well away from those levels we were getting during the ID64 stability test. So in terms of those temperatures, if you're using your CPU mostly for gaming, you're going to be absolutely fine with a 240 set at the top to exhaust. If you do use your PC for more CPU intensive tasks, what I would recommend doing is installing your AIO at the front and having it set to intake, and that is going to significantly bring those temperatures down. And as well, at the front you do have space for a 280mm IO, which again is going to give you even better cooling. So coming on to any issues I had during the build, and in general the whole build process was really straightforward. Even though this is quite a compact case, it was fairly easy to build in. I think really the only issue I had was actually getting the cable coming from the pump plugged into the CPU pump header at the top of the motherboard. And if I was building again, what I would do is install the pump on the motherboard first of all, get all the cables plugged in before lifting the radiator up to the top, and that way you shouldn't run into any problems. And again, I suppose the only other change that I would make to this build if I was doing it again is I think 140mm fans at the front would look slightly better than the 120mm fans that I have installed. So the final thing I want to do is share my thoughts on the case, because I'm not planning on doing a separate case review. I'm just going to save that for pre-release versions of cases, and this case has been out for a few months already. So in general, I really like the case. I think it's a good looking case and the build quality is really good throughout. I absolutely love this extra fan at the bottom. I haven't tested to see whether it makes much of a difference to the GPU temperature with and without it, but I think with a lovely ARGB fan at the bottom, it looks really, really good. And really all you're sacrificing by having it there is your hard drive cage. And in most builds, I actually end up pulling the hard drive cage out anyway. So if you are somebody who likes installing hard drives, again, this mightn't be the case for you. But if you're somebody like me who's using mostly M.2 drives, you're getting the benefit of another good looking fan and potentially more airflow for your GPU. The other thing I absolutely loved about this case was the cable management. I think the cable management bar at the front of the case looks really good and does a great job of hiding all the cables, and I absolutely love what they've done with cable management at the back. The little bits of metal clips that hold the cables out of the way, combined with the Velcro cable straps, did an absolutely brilliant job of managing all the cables. So moving on to things I didn't like about the case, and really there is only a couple of things. The first is that the two included case fans had 3-pin fan connectors rather than 4-pin fan connectors, so you weren't going to be able to run them in PWM mode. And the second thing that I didn't like was the tempered glass panel on the side actually had quite a dark tint to it, so it did make it slightly difficult to see your build through it. The white version of this case actually has a clear tempered glass panel, so I think if I was picking up a version, I would probably go for the white version. But in general, I think this is a really good case, and I would be very happy with having it on my desk. So hopefully you have enjoyed this full step-by-step build guide. If you have, please remember to give it a thumbs up. And if you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button as well. Thanks for watching.